Friday.
Okay, we are now recording. You can go ahead and start. No. Peter, we can't hear you. Peter's volume doesn't seem to be working.
Perhaps you can dial in on a phone line and have his video on, but use
Connect
his
your
phone.
audio.
Yeah,
through
he's
your phone.
pretty tech savvy dude, so I'm sure he may be trying that. In fact, yeah, here's his text.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, do you see that or not?
Yes. It said it's gonna reconnect.
Yeah. So anyway, Peter wrote, Steve can continue and tell them with approval of minutes. If you want to pick up the baton, I guess go for it, or we could wait for him.
We can start. Good morning. Are we recording this? I'm sorry.
Yes, you're set to go.
Thanks a lot, John.
Mhm.
Good morning, everyone. It's January 19th, 2024. It's 8:17 a.m. and this is the monthly meeting of the Weston Board of Education, Education Optimization Committee. Apologies, the chairman of the committee is having some technical issues, so I am filling in for the administrative roles till Peter gets online. Lisa, do you want to start, or do you want to wait for Peter?
I think with that, we really need to wait for Peter.
Okay.
Yeah, we have to do approval of minutes, I believe, from the last meeting, and then would we need all three of us to do that?
No, we have a quorum.
That piece. Oh,
Yeah.
So can I have a motion? Excuse me. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of our last meeting?
So moved.
I'll second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
I'm back. Evidently, I hit the right button.
There you go.
This time around. It's the Google Meets
Go
button.
for it.
This time it worked.
Okay. Okay, Peter, we're ready to go.
All right. So I have to, our agenda item number 3 is, I guess, a presentation by Tecton, right? I don't have it written in front of me. I lost that, but I think I'll give the floor to Jeff and Antonia.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name's Jeff Wazinski, principal at Tecton Architects. Antonia, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Antonia Fiavarella, and I am an architectural designer at Tecton Architects.
There was a few familiar faces on the call. Stephen, it's good to see you. So we met briefly just to talk about taking a look at some of the past work that we've done and kind of revitalizing that and focusing on some key points. I'm going to share my screen here. So we put together just a very brief slide deck. Hopefully you can see the slide on the screen here. So, yeah, okay, great. So in preparation for this meeting, as I mentioned, we had a brief call to better understand kind of the scope of work that we'd be asked to do. So we've identified 5 goals, and certainly these are just the goals that we heard during our preliminary conversation. So if anybody has any adjustments or suggestions, please feel free to jump in. But what we heard was that the Educational Optimization Committee wanted to maintain the 4-building campus and really look at natively reimagining the educational spaces. and focus on enabling some flexibility in new curriculum, focus on healthy spaces, whether that be improvements to the mechanical systems in the building, but also just materials, natural daylight, those kinds of things, and then the best use of the spaces. So really taking a harder look at what you have today and how we can kind of transform it into space that meets all of those goals. Spoke a little bit about the student-centric spaces, making sure that I know your group in the meantime, since we completed our original master plan effort, attended a few different educational conferences where, if you remember, some of the community conversations we had were focused on 21st century learning, the flexibility, adaptability, a whole host of student-centric spaces. So I think those conversations will, I think, unfold in what we're being asked to do, and how those can be translated into possible design. Always keeping an eye on how we can improve operational expenses, security, be more sustainable overall was one of the other goals we heard. And then the main focus at this point is what we heard was middle school and possibly Hurlbut. They need the most attention. Maybe there's a combination of short-term work and best value. So basically try to get these improvements moving forward as in the most economical way. So those were the goals. Just the next slide that I had was, and this is kind of a refresher from some of the information we shared during our master plan, but if the town should, or the district should, want to proceed with a grant application from the state, they're now called OGA, Office of Grants Administration. They're still under the heading, but their process has remained the same. So with any grant application, they're all electronically submitted now, and there's probably about 3 dozen or so categories of information that you need to post as a part of the grant application. But typically, you submit grant applications with the deadline every year of June 30th. And that process is, once you submit that grant application, there's what's called a priority list comes out. So they review all the applications over the summer and into the fall. They'll categorize them in category A, B, or C. Put you on a priority list, which then goes to the educational committee in the beginning of February, and then to the General Assembly for final approval of the grant. So that's kind of the grant process from a
Can I
Sure.
ask a question, Jeff? So first of all, you have asterisk requires funding in place. What does that mean?
So the June 30th deadline means that you have 2 options with funding. So one of the biggest checklist items is either referendum approval or proof that the town supports the project, whatever it may be, whatever size it may be, that funding is in place. There is an option to submit your grant application and hold, if you have a regular town meeting in the fall, to place that project, whatever it may be, on that ballot for referendum approval in the following fall. So, but funding in place means referendum approval.
So that means referendum approval, but not actual financing.
Yeah, no, it's referendum approval, basically proof that the town supports the project. It doesn't mean that you have to start financing. I have another slide that kind of shows you bigger pictures schedule.
Yeah.
But what that means is that you need to basically have a vote.
Yeah. Okay. So then, so let's assume the project costs $1.
Yep.
It goes to, where can it be derailed? So let's assume it costs $1. Where can we find out that it's not going to be approved, or that they'll only approve 50 cents? I mean, what?
Yeah, that's a good question. Most of the communities that we work with, well, there's published reimbursement percentages that the state adheres to. So you wouldn't be getting, so when you submit the grant application, it would be like if you submitted it this year, there's published reimbursement rates for 2024 for the town of Weston. That would be your reimbursement rate, subject to any kind of special legislation that you may review. So there's not a, that's your rate. I guess to add, the question on risk, typically most of our communities that we work with grant applications, they'll submit the grant in June. They'll begin the process to align, to get the team in order, the design team, the CMR, if you're going to hire an OPM, kind of through the summer and into the fall. And they don't really start anything until you get the priority list. Typically when you're listed on the priority list, it's, we've never not had a project go through the legislation and have grant approval. But a lot of folks wait or prepare themselves. And once the priority list comes out, they have more confidence, and then they start proceeding with design. You can't put a shovel in the ground or start construction, which typically isn't a problem. I mean, you can, but the town would be, I guess, at risk. Typically, most towns wait to start the construction funding until the following year when they get their legislative approval for the grant.
But what does it mean, priority list? Let's assume
Yep.
20 communities submit requests for reimbursement.
Yep.
What does it mean by priority?
So, yeah, I'm going to bring this up. So, right now, based on, put this back. So the priority list is basically every grant application that was submitted that was complete. Our experience has been, if you plan on submitting a grant application, let's say this June or next June, it doesn't really matter. We highly recommend you start a dialogue with the state so that they know it's coming. You talk about your project, you talk about the master plan, and you talk about the challenges. They'll give you feedback along the way. And typically when you submit your grant application, you make sure that it's complete. We've never not had a project get to a priority list. So the priority list comes out in December, and this is kind of what it looks like. They'll put them in category A and B. And there's a page here. I just want to show you what it kind of looks like. So category A, this is what happens. They'll list the projects in, basically here's a group of projects that are in category A, which they send, that goes through the legislation and typically it gets approved. They break them into A and B, just from a funding perspective. I'm not aware of any year that they didn't fund both category A and B.
And why do they do that?
Just to prioritize the projects first. It doesn't change reimbursement or anything. It basically puts it shows that the category A is essentially more urgent than category B. But again, I haven't seen, in years past, and I'll send you this document. It's
great.
It's a good document to have because here's the category B. So we worked on, let's see. So we worked on all the Hartford grant applications. So we submitted all those last June or before June. So they're on the priority list. So now, Hartford's a little bit unique, but they get, these are under a special legislation. So they get a higher percentage reimbursement rate. So they're going to wait. They're going to probably put out and begin the process from a design team selection perspective, a builder perspective, and then they'll wait until spring to start,
And,
start construction.
and away from Hartford, in terms of reimbursement rate, what would Weston's be? Would you
Yeah,
know?
good question. I think, hold on one second. Let me see if I can find it. Weston, I'm going to tell you right now, it's not going to be anywhere. It's pretty low. Let me see if this is. It's 2023. Give me a sec here. Here, I'll show you this one because I think this was. I'll pull up 2024.
Okay.
But it'll give you an idea. And I'll send you this too. Weston is, yeah. So you're in the. So I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah.
20s, I think I recall.
Yeah.
So,
It's been pretty consistent. If you look, I mean, there's probably a new rate for 2020, or there is a new rate for 2024 grants, but
so there's a penalty for what's considered a wealthy community.
yeah, it's based on a whole host of factors, socioeconomic factors, and that's your rate. Yeah, you're probably one of the lower communities, as far as reimbursement rate.
What's Darien? Can you move up?
Yeah, absolutely. Darien, I would be willing to bet that they're going to be very similar.
It's lower actually by 100 basis points.
Correct. Yeah. So I can get you this full list. I can get you the priority list so that you'll have some.
Yeah, Westport's lower too.
Yeah.
And then who determines these numbers?
So that my understanding is, and there's a description of how they do this on the state's website. It's based on a formula, and it changes from year to year. You can see some go up and some go down. Like I'll pick Putnam, depending upon what happens in their community. Some districts, so they wrote 2 years ago, they had special legislation for districts, I think over population of 60,000 or something like that. I forget the threshold. Their base reimbursement was 60%. So there's some communities go after special legislation to change the reimbursement rate. They've been trying to do away with that just because it's created some issues. But if near you, so a good example of that is Stanford, right? So Stanford was in the 20s or 30s, and they 2 years ago special legislation to be base rate of 60%. So that's why you see some more projects coming out there.
Jeff, could you go back to Weston, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
So what this means, the 22 and the 12, we had talked about this during the plan, but the 12% is if new construction, 22% is for alterations, renovations, or renovation as new. So we're working with the town of Madison, where they're optimizing their elementary schools. So they're building a new elementary school, but got the higher reimbursement rate because they proved that was the most economical approach overall. So I'm not quite sure. It sounds like what we're studying or being asked to study is to renovate existing buildings. So I don't know if that would come into play, but just so you're aware, there is some latitude there between those 2%.
So they're taking a step back. I've heard there's two lists, although both, in a sense, if when approved, there's no time difference. There's no latency, right?
That's correct. Yep.
There's a criteria out there called urgency or immediacy, right? But we don't really know
what that means and who determines how urgent or how immediate. But that's the criteria. So in our application, we may say it's urgent or immediate, but it really doesn't make a difference overall because list A and B proceed. Then what I just heard was, and this is what the FOC had teased out and presented to the public. There's two reimbursement rates, fully new, and then some sort of scale of renovate, alter, rejuvenate, whatever we call it. But it's up to us to sort of position things as renovate or alter. And there could be guts or it could be a facade, right? I mean, whatever altering is.
The one key ingredient that you need to be acutely aware of with a renovation, and this is why we were, for the middle school, if you're doing a deeper renovation, meaning a more comprehensive renovation, there's a term called renovate as new. And the reason why that is so important is because if you're just for example, if you just do a renovation where you're doing, all right, we're going to renovate this portion of the building, we're going to renovate that portion, but we're going to pick our spots and not do a comprehensive renovation. The state looks at that a little differently, and they have what's called an ineligible list, meaning they'll go in and say, well, you should have maintained your mechanical system, you should have maintained your lights. So those become ineligible for reimbursement. So if you go in and just alter or renovate portions of your building, the risk to the community from a financial perspective is the ineligible list of items grows. When you go in as renovate as new and the state approves you as renovate as new, meaning basically you need to go in and all systems, all components of the building at least a 20-year life expectancy. So you'd have to replace roofs, windows, mechanical systems. The benefit of doing that level of renovation is the ineligible list of items drops down dramatically, and that's it's a key component to understand the difference between the two, because when somebody comes in, and I'm sure we heard it during the master plan process, why don't we just renovate this portion? We only want to spend X amount, and that's fine. It's just the risk that comes with it is that you're going to get less reimbursement. So you have to kind of do the cost benefit on that. Does that make sense?
Right. No, you reiterated what I understood. It's sort of a foot race, right? Between how much you're willing to spend, how much you're going to get reimbursed to the degree of any rejuvenation, renovation, repairs versus something more significant, right? It's just a big foot race, and you got to figure out what your pain point is and decide. It's better to build a wing than just to fix a roof in a science room, right?
I mean, it depends on the build. Like if you kept up with all the systems and you replaced, there's systems in there that are 5 or 10 years old, then it probably makes sense to do a targeted alteration or renovation. But when you have a building that hasn't really seen an awful lot, the cost benefit isn't really there to and I understand those costs increase, but when you kind of play it out, those are the choices that
right. And what a new concept that I've heard just now, and it didn't sink in during the FOC presentations, is you kind of get penalized if you don't do ongoing repairs, right? So it's actually the investment in repairs pays off because then you're not creating an ineligibility list when you do other things. You sort of nullify that list.
Yeah.
So investment in repairs actually pays off in future financial relief because you're not pushing that boundary. You're like, hey, we've done a wing and we didn't have to do the HVAC system or the handlers because we made that investment already.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. yeah, I mean, to complicate this even further, and
Yeah, it's
I
complicated.
won't, but that's the OGA capital grant, reimbursement. I'm sure you've seen across the district because it's been in the news quite a bit. The governor has allocated a certain pool of money for basically HVAC grants, mechanical systems upgrades because of so there's a new requirement for air quality in schools, and so there's a separate grant program for things just like replacing rooftop units or mechanical systems. That is a completely separate from what I'm showing you here.
Right, and for completeness, we reviewed it. I think Phil Cross and I and others have looked at that. The ultimate criteria for that is underprivileged school districts seem to win those grants, and whether it's DOE funded or state funded, it seems to be like a Bridgeport is a better candidate than a Weston because of social and economic issues. But I think we can be beneficiaries, but very minor. But that's right. That feeds into invest in repairs rather than try to build something or renovate to new and not see things eligible as you do it. Okay, good. That's good information. Thank you.
So I can touch lightly on the schedule, or at least the draft schedule should you want to proceed. In a very basic form, there's components of the grant application that you would need to develop. Things like an educational specification, there's space standards, those kinds of things. So if you're going to try to reinvent, let's say, the middle school, there's a component related to the program, the educational program that you would have to work on. That obviously ties to conceptual design ideas on how you could translate the building, which could all happen February, March-ish timeframe. If you did want to proceed with an actual grant application, there's various different approvals that you'll need in place. Things like EdSpec approval, authorization to submit a grant application to the superintendent, stuff like that. That could happen, April, May, June timeframe. Obviously, back to Steve's original question. I mean, on the financing or on the funding, that referendum vote is typically is the obvious biggest checklist item that you would need. And some communities do it in a spring vote, some communities wait until the fall. So, you could proceed with, some ideas related to if it's middle school or whatever the focus wants to be over the next 2-3 months. Invest in doing all the checklist items, get your grant application prepared and submit it electronically, and then wait for vote. I guess whether you submit it this year or next year, some of this information is really not, you're going to need it anyway. So it's not like you would have to throw it out if you waited another year. So there's, and then down towards the bottom of this piece, there's a whole host of like other due diligence that obviously you would want to wait a little further, take the temperature on what the community really wants to proceed with. There's updates to site due diligence and things that you would need to do as part of the grant application. So that's just a kind of high level on the schedule. And then this really is like just putting it in perspective. If you were to submit a grant application, and this gets back to, and hopefully you can see my cursor, but June 30th now, December 15th would be the priority list. This is a little different than what I explained, but typically you would go through the OPM design team, CMR selection process. You would design the project if it was a bigger, renovation project. Put it out to bid, and then build it. So green is grant application, yellow is design, blue is construction. The reality is that these projects are, and we did talk about this during the master plan, from soup to nuts, 4 to 5 years. Just so, put it in context. It's not, this doesn't, from a financing perspective and from a town, how do you smooth out, some of the tax impact. I mean, you're really not spending significant dollars until you really start into construction, which could, 2 or 3 years. So hopefully that information is helpful.
But to my fellow board members, from a sequencing point of view, the board has not decided on the configuration of schools. We've not had a formal vote on it, which we have to do. No, we have to have a recommendation to the board as to whether or not we want to continue with 4 or consolidate into 3. Now, I think the recommendation is we continue with the 4, but we do need to bring it to the board first. And then let's assume it goes as the discussion goes today. We have to be able to present the alternatives, 4 versus 3. Then we're going to have to do the same for the Board of Selectmen and for the Board of Finance, and then ultimately the town. So there's a lot of comparative work that's going to have to be done.
Yeah, no doubt. I wanted to go back to the schedule, Jeff. This assumed what degree of construction? Just you were like swagging it for a few years. Is this a new construction on a greenfield, or is this working and disrupting an existing building? Just what was your starting point here? You're on mute.
Sorry, too many windows open. I was trying to screen share and couldn't hit that button. So this would be a more comprehensive renovation. This contemplated, I pulled this from, other similar related projects. This would be if you were to do a comprehensive renovation to one or the other, Hurlbut or the middle school. If it was more targeted, isolated renovations, that schedule certainly could change and be the grant application approval process wouldn't really change though.
Right. And one subtle point is let's say we need to renovate 2 buildings, right? They wouldn't be done in parallel. The students could handle that. That's just too much.
Yeah.
They'd be done in serial, right? So in a sense, you're talking about it could take 10 years to do this for 2 buildings, right? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's not unrealistic. I mean, some communities overlap them. And then to be clear on that, though, that's a good point you bring up, is each project is a separate grant application. So you wouldn't, and a separate vote, they're all separate. So if you want to do a comprehensive to the middle school, then that's a vote. If you want to do a comprehensive to Hurlbut, that's a vote. If you want to break, say, okay, we only want to do a portion of the middle school now, that's a grant. And if you want to do another portion 3 years from now, that's a separate grant. So each one of these is its own kind of, if you want state grant money, is its own kind of effort.
I think the challenge is that, let's say we start with the middle school. The town also wants to know comprehensively, oh, great, we ran out of money. We can't do Hurlbut. Like, we have to have a sense of the overall And I know pricing changes within 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that budgeting numbers can be, and I think we during the master plan kind of identified a whole host of different budgeting numbers. But yeah, I mean, if these are the two areas or two focus buildings, then yeah, you could map out projected budgets for each of them.
And just for my edification, Jeff, are you still working with the town on
Their work. We turned over the report to the town on the town buildings with the assessment and list of improvements with cost estimates. That was probably, I think there's a new town manager, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah, that was when the former town manager was in place.
Okay, thanks.
However, when you turned it over, you weren't considering that we wanted to renovate Hurlbut and therefore the senior center might go somewhere else, correct?
Yeah, it was more or less an assessment of the conditions and then identifying those deficiencies, and then less about discussion of program, and less about relocating different departments. It was really like what do we have? What are we dealing with as far as program? What are we dealing with as far as existing conditions? So that report is complete. Yep.
So, given we have expertise in front of us, I consider no question a bad question, right? And then it's like, are we not asking a good question yet? Is there anything we haven't asked that should be asked since we have you here in front of us?
No, I mean, I think we do a fair amount of this, and I think the community just has to get comfortable with what path they want to take, because I think if there's no appetite for more substantial renovation work, then you have your answer, and I think you start looking at prioritizing strategic improvements. And that comes with a different path and a different cost. If it's comprehensive in nature, then the path is a little different. And I would even suggest that you try to begin a dialogue with the state to try to maximize your reimbursement, because 20%, 25% reimbursement is on a bigger project is pretty substantial to a community like yours. So, I think we see it all the time, where communities are struggling with it. And I guess I think you guys know better than we do, where you are, where the town is financially, and, a community like yours should plan on doing a project. I've said this, I think, during the master plan, they should be planning on doing a project, every, 5 years, 10 years. It's just you have to cycle through these. You have a portfolio that by the time you get through your entire building list, you're probably going to have to start over again. It's just that's kind of the way it works, right? These buildings they get heavily used, the schools do, certainly. So, to expect them to last 30 to 40 years without substantial renovations is
You just introduced the term strategic improvements. Is there a siren somewhere?
Yeah, there's
I'm
a
hearing
lot
a
of
siren.
background noise.
Yeah. Okay. So Jeff, you just introduced the term strategic improvement. How does that differentiate from a renovation and the other description you have? Is this just another way of saying the same thing, or is there?
No, I mean, it's in other words, saying, okay, this year we're going to tackle the library. This year we're going to tackle the science labs. This year, if these areas, and then you can prioritize them based on, you know, their educational impact or improvement. But at that point, if you were to break the projects into that scale and size, I'm not sure, you know, the pursuit of grant applications makes a lot of sense. To be quite honest with you.
Right. That's what I was getting towards. Right. If we choose to, in a sense, surgically do things rather than holistically do more of a building, then we may make ourselves ineligible for grants, but we have very fine-tuned control over time and specifics. But we eat it. Our taxpayers eat it, basically.
Yeah. I mean, because you'd have to do the exact same thing for every small project to get the state reimbursement. So, you know, if your reimbursement rate was 90%, I'd say, yeah, it makes sense, but it's not. You know, the cost benefit, it probably isn't there for the smaller projects for you folks.
So we have a minute left. I want to bring in Tony into this because, and also for Chad's benefits. What's an example of a surgical improvement if we're looking at our initiatives? The first slide you did, safety, sustainability, STEM, performing arts. What have you done, sort of, if you had a school with 40 rooms, but so many are dedicated to these educational pursuits, like surgically, how would that fit in? Would we work on some sort of sustainability first, and then a science room, and then a performing arts, but worry about security? I mean, just in a 2-minute capture of that, Antonia, maybe you can educate Chad and I and Steve on these ideas.
Sure. I think from a community perspective, a parent perspective, teacher perspective, safety is one of the top things that we always hear in communities. So if there are safety improvements through some environmental measures that you can, through landscaping in the front of your school or your security vestibules, those, like your first entry into the building, might be a good security related strategic step. Inside the building, as we talked about 21st century learning, strategic innovations there, media centers come top of mind to me. I think we hear a lot in our educational conversations with leadership and teachers that there's a real desire to encourage more project-based learning and to create a learning hub in the center of the building. And that media center transforms from, it's book to project. There are places for students to read and research, have story time, but then also go make something, present their work, display their work. So we're seeing the evolution of media centers being strengthened as it relates to lots of other curriculum areas like science, like math, like English. So we're seeing that collaborative, interdisciplinary teaching, project-based learning happening in that hub. And then I would say from a sustainability perspective, if there are targeted systems or elements of that we can go in and work with our mechanical engineering consultants to really maximize, I would say fresh air is probably top of mind. So if there's a way that we can add elements to existing systems or fix existing systems to enhance their filtration rates, bring in more fresh air, those would be some key sustainability related, but also indoor air quality related items. Jeff, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's great. I mean, you touched on the word that we're hearing a lot of now, interdisciplinary, where there's a lot more project-based learning. So the interaction between I guess humanities, science, it's really kind of an interesting history. There's a very interesting way that these programs are now being combined, which needs scalable space. So I think that's the other piece that we're seeing a lot of is like bringing two classes together for those kinds of settings. I think is an important piece. So, but everything else is spot on.
So scalable is interesting. I think the superintendent introduced the word agile during the summer.
Yep.
So it could scale down too, right? I mean, you can scale up and scale down. And one of the considerations we have is the spectrum of enrollment, right? So we have spaces that are underutilized and not really overutilized, but inefficiently utilized. So that's why I brought that up, that we have this lumpiness between K through 12 because of the nature of the curriculum and the instruction. But also there's sort of poorly utilized space, if that's a good use of it, and why not scale up or scale down and make us more agile. So this is where I wanted to take the last part of our conversation, is that it may be prudent to start working on that alongside repairs, because then we position ourselves for either not having an eligibility problem, or we may find that things are working pretty good. So maybe in a sense, some larger renovate to new is not as necessary as we thought 2 years ago. I'm just sort of speculating now, but I mean, we think along these lines. I think agile is a good word. All right, thank you, Antonia.
Sure.
I have a question. I don't know who did the design for the middle school, the Renovate is New design. I think it was Renovate is New. Maybe I'm mistaken. In the original plan, who actually did it? I mean, I know you guys did it, but is it like, if I wanted to kind of talk through it, with whom should I speak?
It was a collaboration between Antonia and I.
Okay, so
yep.
I could speak to, not that I don't want to speak to you, but,
Yeah.
I could kind of like have a meeting and kind of go through some of the things that we, maybe with the middle school principal and get some feedback to sort of fine tune that piece, I think might be helpful. I know I'm probably getting ahead of myself, but I do worry about, kind of working on this multi-pronged approach, I guess, to get us where we need to go.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does to me. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those
Okay.
concepts were kind of first shot out of the box based on the information we heard. But yeah, refinement. If we're at a point now where we want to refine it to better relate to what the needs are and to agile. To make this, I think that's makes a lot of sense to have more dialogue there. Yep.
Okay, and with regards to looking at the Hurlbut, which I know is further down, and I'm looking kind of at the proposed milestone schedule. I know that we talked about sort of the same thing, if we could look at Hurlbut and come up with some ideas with that, administrative team. We have our thoughts, but that might be helpful. I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself. But I know that you were talking, Jeff, and Antonia, maybe you'd have something for us like in March. And I'm just thinking, we would welcome the opportunity to kind of talk to you about that with our team, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of the process that we would recommend is, more dialogue to better understand how we can,
So then maybe moving forward with a mutually convenient time, starting with the middle school, I think might be good.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep. Makes sense.
Just to sort of get a sense. Okay. Thank you.
Lisa, let me jump in here. First of all, Jeff and Antonia, nice to meet you both. I haven't met you before, and sorry that I'm not on video today. Unfortunately, I'm having to commute, so I don't want to have to deal with my commuting view the entire time. But just jumping in on a couple things. First of all, Lisa, you just said 2 times in a row, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself. I would actually encourage you. I think the entire point is how the buildings actually function and how useful they are in terms of the educational vision of our district. So I think you're exactly right to ask those questions and examine what this would actually be like for students on the ground. Peter, let me throw a question to you just about the scope of this conversation. First of all, are we 4 minutes over already? We need to wrap up, or do we have until 9:15?
I can keep going a couple minutes. I don't know, Peter. Is that okay?
I forget whether it's a 45-minute or hour session, but why don't we go to 9:15?
I know that perhaps Jeff and Antonia and others have.
Yeah, I don't know.
So I don't know.
I don't have a conflict. Jeff, Antonia, do you?
I have a 9:15. But Antonia, I think you're open too, right?
I'm available. Yes.
Okay, maybe we could just bear with us for 5 more minutes. Does that work?
And then my next question, Peter, is again to the scope of conversation. I'm happy to hold these questions for a different time, but I have a bunch of questions that have really nothing to do about the schedule of grants and the application process. A bunch of questions about the vision and also what's spelled out in not just the deck we walked through, but the other deck as well, which is a bunch of visuals about comparative spaces and things like that. Should we get into those questions now, or is that better held for a different time, given that we're at 9:05?
Would the questions be for the architects, or would they be for us to sort of go through a few
They would
concepts
they would be
and see where
they would
it
be
fits
both
in?
for Tecton and also for us as the EOC to sort of consider our prioritization.
All right. I think maybe we'll have to invite Antonia and Jeff back to
Yeah.
go through the second deck.
If,
And,
if
fair
I can suggest, perhaps we find a mutually convenient time to talk a little bit about that. And then at our next meeting, we can share that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds good to me.
Okay.
Yeah, that works. Yep.
All right, I guess we can wrap it up, since I think we're maybe at the limit of what we can absorb in 45 minutes, only because it's so comprehensive and it's just, scratching at the surface still. So we have our next scheduled meeting on February 16th, and we'll talk amongst ourselves about the agenda for that. It could be to revisit some of the second slide set. It could be to see, as the superintendent suggested, how the principals now get involved, and really they own their buildings in a sense. So what, at a building level, what the view of utility and new utility could be. So we haven't figured out that agenda yet, but we will in a post.
Yeah, Peter, if I can jump in for a second, this is just an incredibly simplistic framework for it, but I would describe that a lot of our conversation today is focused on the how we get there, and I think we do need to pivot pretty hard also to the what, to Lisa's point, like what happens in these buildings, how do these buildings facilitate the what? So
Yeah, I agree, but it was overdue
early
to get
plea
to the
into that.
how, because
Yeah,
we
for
were
sure.
operating in sort of conceptual. Now we
Yeah.
have some, we're a little more grounded in reality. And just to note that we may bring, not to the next meeting, but to a future meeting, some of the input from the Green Building Conference that's being held in Santa Fe. So that'd be quite a lively conversation to meet the request of Chad to get back into what we want to happen inside buildings, and then bring in Antonia's knowledge in that area. Okay, so I think we've covered enough today.
Okay, the meeting is the 16th, correct? Is that what everybody?
February
heard?
16th. Yeah.
Okay, so we can invite you guys, and maybe we can touch base before that. I'll work on that. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
All right. So
Chad, Peter,
does
Steve.
anyone want to move towards for adjournment?
No, I don't. Can I
Okay.
just ask, Jeff and Antonia, thanks for this. I just need to speak amongst ourselves internally. You don't need to continue on. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks. I really appreciate
Good to see you.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
Thank you all.
it. Okay, thanks. So,
Molly Whitehouse.
So we really need to not only focus on process and timing of process, because as I said before, we have to present to the board the 3-4 concept, why we're recommending one versus the other. The board has to vote, so that's going to be something we're going to need Tecton and ourselves to help. Then we're going to have to go through that same process with the selectmen, and then ultimately the Board of Finance, and then most importantly, the town. So I think we really need to think as a committee, how we're going to do all of that. In addition to the practical, which is what we've been talking about this morning. So just from a process point of view, knowing there are time constraints as it relates to whether we do or do not apply for state grants. And then two, Lisa, we really need to sit down with Samantha and find out what she's thinking. Because I got to believe it's going to have some impact on, and Mike and the Board of Finance on what we're doing.
So I'm going back to what you said, having the Board of Ed vote on a 3 versus 4. And I want to make sure that I can articulate the reasons. I can certainly give reasons from my point of view, but I could also see them asking similar questions as to what the town did when they looked at the FOC, like, well, what will that look like? How is the impact? Before they even agree to it. So I feel like we may have to get a little bit further along with Jeff and Antonia to be able to give a comprehensive reason.
No, they've given the reason, or they've given the alternatives. I mean, the Tecton study shows, the difference between 3 versus 4. And so we just need.
It shows a different 3, like a different 4. Like they don't have the option of renovating Hurlwood in there.
No, so that's why we really need to spend some time on this. And the fact that the town, one of the shortcomings, and I'm sure whoever listens to this, one of the shortcomings of the FOC is we were marching down a road without taking into well, it's not the FOC's problem. We were marching down a road of focusing on schools, correctly focusing on schools, but the town had needs, and their needs weren't taken up until late into the process. So we're getting down to the decision point, and we just need to make sure that whatever we decide, that we need to know what the town is doing as well.
So,
And so
I'm
going to reach out to Samantha.
Okay.
And get an idea of where they are, but we can't be doing this. We need to be doing this in parallel because the money comes from one pot, not 2 pots of money. So we need to figure that out.
So are you going to set up a meeting with Samantha and us, or?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's
Okay.
what I'd
I
like
think
to
that
do.
would be the first step. Okay.
That'll be the first step.
Yeah, I agree. We can't operate in a vacuum. But one of the motivations of today's presentation was the gap fill, right? We didn't have such information, I think, when we saw the FOC's final presentation. Now we have much more insight to other options. So that's why this was the agenda item today. But right.
Yeah. No. The agenda item is great. I'm just thinking that this is a very important decision for many reasons, for the education side, but the town, it's going to be, whatever we do is going to be a large capital expense, and it's going to take everybody, it's going to impact everyone in town. So I just want to make sure that we do it correctly, because there's obviously a group in town who believes that we can go forward with 3 schools versus 4. Now they erroneously believe that by closing the middle school, the town's going to save $8 million. I think that's the number. It'd be wonderful for whoever has said that to show us that, because there's that's a number that's how they come to it. I have no idea. Nor do they take into consideration the cost of consolidating 4 schools into 3, because we don't have the space and the technology that's going to be required to do that. So, but there will be people coming out and saying that, so we need to be able to address it. So,
Steve, let me jump in on one thought here, which is the following. I agree with your point that we have to proceed with the sort of fiscal flow of how this all works and the talent partnership. I completely agree. I also really suggest we don't lose sight of the goal of what happens within the school, and I'll tell you why. It is much easier to get people on board with an idea if there's an actual vision behind what actually happens within there. If the conversation remains completely focused on dollars, there's really only one metric, which is fewer dollars is better. So I think we need to be doing both at the same time.
Yeah, and I look, I totally agree with you. It's one thing to be talking about the walls, because that's what you're talking about from a building. But
Yeah.
it's the most important conversation is what's going to go on
Yeah.
inside those walls, and that's why we're doing what we're doing.
That's right. Do you want to buy a house for $250,000 or $500,000? It entirely depends on what the house is. And if we're
Yeah,
not
and
painting a clear vision for the town of what it is they're actually getting on board for, it's going to be much, much more difficult to have any kind of a robust dialogue as opposed to just what is the outlay of funds.
And it's critical. It's critical because, the buildings we're talking about are, I don't know, about 75 years old, maybe older. I don't know. The middle
Yeah.
school's got to be 40 years old.
And there are bigger
But
issues
but the
too.
technology is alive, right? I mean, we wouldn't be having. No one talked about AI 2 years ago, right? Now that's
Yeah.
all they talk about, and who
Yeah.
knows what they're going to talk about 5 years from now?
Yeah, that's right.
And
That's
that's what
right.
we're trying to solve for.
That's right. I have two provocative questions. It's 9:15, but I'll throw them out there anyway. One, is Tecton the final vendor? Meaning, aren't we still a bit in the RFP process, or have we said yes?
No,
We're proceeding with Tecton.
That's a great question, and we do need to have that conversation because we're
Yeah.
asking them to do work.
Yeah.
And
I
if they're
think
going to
we-
do work, they should be paid for it.
One of the first questions the town would ask, though, is like, have you done a legitimate RFP, and how do you
We-
know Tecton's the best provider? So I think we can't forget that.
We did do an RFP when we chose Tecton. And the next phase of a Tecton is once we decide we want to do it with the configuration of the schools, then you need a Tecton-like firm, to take you through, all the processes to get you, to draw up the plans, go to the state and all of that. And that probably will require another RFP.
Yeah,
When-
agreed. Okay, second provocative question is, can we enlist private funding for this project? Can we try to raise significant funds? Does it need to be publicly financed solely?
My
Right.
guess is that could impact the funding from the state, but I don't know that for a fact. The other thing I just want to mention is Phil and I spoke to Tecton, and the only thing we asked him, and Phil asked him to send us like a contract, was to work on providing a revised middle school design and also the Hurlbut design, because they're not guaranteed to do this work. Because we have to pay them for this piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, those are my questions I want to get to eventually. We don't have to today, but too Tecton or not too Tecton, I guess is one question. And the other is there room for private financing within this somewhere?
I can ask Jeff if that impacts, just from a point of view, he knows those state contracts. I think it could impact the reimbursement, but I don't know. I can ask.
Yeah. I'd be curious to find out. And Steve, you might have some insight on that too, given your financial background. Maybe you can do a little digging. I do think that, if we were trying to fundraise for one specific thing, there might be appetite to do that.
Yeah, maybe interesting question. I'd never considered that. Sorry.
I think the furthest we've gotten with private financing is the PTO's initiative on playground bricks, right? So
Yeah.
there may be some legal stipulations that say that that's where it ends. It doesn't end
Exactly.
on having a building named after you or something because you
Yeah,
finance it.
exactly. And that's the meaningful question to find out.
Well, in the past, when and there's 2 points I want to make here. With the high school renovation project, there were certain things that they just didn't have the money and they didn't do. One of them was renovating the auditorium, and it was Weston Arts that literally sold seats in the auditorium to renovate it. The other thing that people, have to remember too is that we have these two buildings. However, there is significant work that still has to be done at the high school. We've got 15 classrooms that do not have good air. They need their windows and all that replaced. There are things that weren't done in the first renovation that we're still playing catch up in. And I know that that has come up in the, quite frankly, the NEASC evaluation is part of the process. What's the plan to finish some of these things? And we're trying to be vague at best to show it's in process, but
Look, I mean, the FOC never considered the high school.
no.
We didn't consider the high school, and you know, look, if we were to encompass the high school in here, you know, that's a whole that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, no, I know. And I feel bad because there's stuff that was never done the first renovation with that. And then what happens to that? Like, I feel like we're so behind in so many ways, if you will.
Yep. Okay. But we're not going to solve that right now. So,
No, we're not. I'm just saying.
well, on that note, since it's cold out, we don't have to worry about air conditioning in the high school today. But other than
No,
that, yeah, no, that's an issue. But it's not an issue that other communities haven't faced either. I mean, it's not like Weston's an outlier that they didn't do
No.
something.
no,
Okay,
we're
but
not. I'm just mentioning it.
Yeah, no. It's it's part of the process, and we're dealing with buildings that need attention, and it's not as if we haven't paid attention to them, and we've paid significant attention to boilers and Hurlbut and windows, and it's not like we haven't done a lot over the years. It's just things get old and they need to be addressed.
That's there's just to finalize the thought. There's the our capital budget discussions address part of that, and then as Jeff said, you have the invest in repairs to lower your risk of ineligibility overall. So that's where it flows out of. So we've learned two things today with respect to these things and how they can be applied to finishing the work on the high school too. Okay, I got to run.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry, I'm late for a meeting.
now, can someone move to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Can I have a second? Chad?
Yes, I second.
The new meeting is adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you Monday.
Have a good day. Okay, bye-bye.